So, quickly, I'll start here because I don't know how many of y'all have been able to attend the other series, but I do notice that we've been speaking about mass incarceration in a general and vague sense, and since we have some very active women in particular, I think it's very important for us to emphasize the ways in which mass incarceration is impacting our women. That's something that we don't really do enough discussion about. And before we dive into that, I'll start with you, Mary. I know you have something that we want to show the people. So do we have that queued up? We ready to go? I'm going to let you introduce the piece, and then we're going to get into it.
Okay, sure. So this piece that we're going to see is entitled Ain't I a Woman? And it documents my experience of being incarcerated, specifically the experience of being shackled while giving birth for over 43 hours, and subsequently being sent to solitary confinement upon release from the hospital. This is a 3-part series, so you'll just see the first part. But I encourage you to go online and Google ISIS the Savior, Ain't I a Woman, to see the full piece. Thank you.
Raleigh the Beats.
Yo. It's much more than you can see. Nothing could ever come between a mother's love and their offspring. I mean, they had me come to the bed for 43 hours. I had to squat and cough, strip naked. Look, I know they mad we made it. Let me talk to 'em. Yo. Rubbing on my blessing from heaven. 9 months pregnant, stressing. Confined behind the birds of Riverside Corrections. Shackled as we made our exit. Greeted by the paramedics. Left laid cuffed to the bed during the C-section. Anesthesiologist apprehensive and threatened. A med student leaves the room, quickly changes direction. Claims it's too upsetting her slept, so she doesn't want to risk infection. 43 hours on labor, it's life threatening. The flashback screams echo from a slave ship wreckage. A hard lesson, but tell me what's the deeper message? Faced with the same evils, does history really repeat itself, or is it the people? Instead of answering the door, I should have peeked from the peephole. Slid out the side door to slip on some street clothes. No visitors or mail from any of my amigos. I live in hell and aches, cold sweats and dizzy spells though. Guess what? Nah, they never saw love like this. I love you, son. Remember when I used to read to you? To infirmary, stretched out on the gurney. Just fire my attorney. Judge trying to burn me. Code D just OD, so DA want to turn me. But I live by the code that the OGs learn me. Waiting on the day that I'm free to reunite with my seed. Doctor prescribes postpartum medicine. 40 milligrams of lithium, 30 thorazine, plus a couple sedatives to help me cope with these dreams. Dwelling on the negatives, can't call on my relatives. So I eat, sleep, shit, where the beast's belly is. Should've used an alias, but what is the purpose? 6 years on the run before my background surfaced. Luckily, I was out of town on a purchase. Connect called me up, gave me a deal on some surplus. Serving my minimum was enough to make you nervous, but I vomit in the courtroom when they handed down the verdict. Damn. But look, yo, look, they never saw love like this. I'm telling you. We can't be separated. Being broke is a pet peeve. Imagine being trapped in the hood and can't leave. Do you know what that do to your self-esteem? Could you still wake up and manage to dream? Or does it dry out like a raisin in the sun? Imagine being cuffed to the bed, birthing your son, never nursing your son, looking for a savior, but that person don't come. Locked in a cell, serving 23 and 1. Y'all chickens is dumb, I'm numb, cause getting money always been a rule of thumb. Flashback at summertime, mama bustin' I went through. I seen a couple cop cars circle our residential, cause stomachs on empty and robberies on the menu. So when they plot against you, tell them dig a plot to get into. Red dot, Hindu, look at what I've been through. Survival is essential. Look, we still here. 10 years later.
Yeah, you definitely can flow. Oh my God, give it up one more time. Wow. Matter of fact, I have my little list of questions, but after seeing that, I'm gonna scrap this because, firstly, let me acknowledge you by firstly saying thank you for sharing your story, because I know every time we do, it takes us back to a moment, all right? And I just want to acknowledge your resilience to go through all this and share it with the world. I'm not. Oh wow. Do you want to? Well, give it up one more time. I'm interested to hear how did you come up with the concept to get inside and like put the flow together just walk us through that.
Well, this particular piece, I feel like I've been writing it like my whole life. After this first 5-minute video, there's a second video that gives the backstory or gives a window into like the ecosystem and the social ills that like created the environment where folks have to commit these survival crimes to be alive. And to live in society and to, meet their basic needs. And then the third part goes into, it's like a victory lap where once, I was impacted, but now I've come out on the other side, and it's like a rally call for other formerly impacted people to be more than just at the table, but be at the head and the forefront of this criminal justice reform conversation. And that means getting involved in politics. For this particular project, it was used for, it was an organizing tool to support the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act, both locally in Pennsylvania and then nationally, which is a set of laws that would stop the shackling of women who are incarcerated, and then, have other components where women, they wouldn't be placed in facilities too far from the homes, having free phone calls to the caregivers so that like that bond between mother and child isn't too disrupted. So that involved me meeting with, local legislators and speaking with them along with other impacted women, both on the inside and outside, and, drafting legislation, really putting our voices into the issues that impact us the most. So that's pretty much what that journey was like.
Well, thank you for that work, because it's really important. And actually, I'll segue to you, Donna, because you've been doing this work for some time. And I think it's important for our audience to get some context in regards to the ways mass incarceration has been impacting women in particular, in the increasing number throughout the last 3 decades. So if you can give us a quick a bird's eye view of what has contributed to that and the work that you're doing to circumvent it.
So I just want to say that, I served 27 years in New York State's maximum security prison for women. And, just looking at that and going back to my experience being a young mother in the system, my daughter's here now, and trying to work on a relationship, because what the system can do and does do to those of us, right? We do have to take ownership for our parts, whatever parts they may be, right? But what the systems do to tear apart families and to harm women, especially black and brown women. And I think about that, and every time I look at my daughter, I think about that. The harms that were caused because of the system and the systemic injustices that continue to take place. And that shaped me as well. It formed my activism, my advocacy. It shaped me to become the person that I am today, because, I helped the legislation that we created in New York, the anti-shackling law, which we had to fight over and over again. It was passed, and we had to keep fighting it because they still shackle pregnant women to this day, and they're not supposed to by law, but they continue to do it and cause harm, right? And so those things drive me, and also just the separation of families and just the harm that's caused to certain communities. We know these communities are black and brown. They're where we're from, right? And the harms that are inflicted upon us. And so we have to look beyond just the prison experience, but look at the other systemic ills that are happening within our communities, why certain communities still have no lights, the streets aren't paved, their playgrounds don't look like playgrounds, right? They look like battlefields. The school system are horrible, right, at best, and the way in which our children are treated. And so all those things are driving factors for me. But the biggest driving factor is when, because of the abuse that I went through, and being a young girl that went into the system, and I thought I was alone in that pain and that harm, that trauma, and then I went into the system and I found hundreds upon hundreds of other young women that have been subjected to trauma and pain and harm, and they were thrown away basically, and not heard and silenced. And it just started dawning on me throughout my 27 years that something has to change here. This is wrong, because you keep throwing people away and not addressing the harm that you contributed to. And so that's why I do the work that I do, because that's wrong, right? There's nothing right about it. And so we can't continue to talk about incarceration as the response, the response, the response, the response. No, it's not the response. We have to start looking at root causes. We have to look at the issues that we contribute to as a whole and to stop it, right? We can't no longer continue this because it's wrong, and we're going down a very dark, we're down it already, a very dark, dark hole. And so the work that I do and my organization does, along with, my sisters here and beyond, addresses this. We work, we're fighting. We're fighting to stop these ills and these harms.
Yeah, give it up. Thank you for that. And I think you really touched on the importance of us recognizing that we need to be more preventive than solution-oriented, right? Like these young people, boys, girls, whomever, like we need to get them, we need to address the harms that are happening in our community so that they ultimately won't land in jail or prison. But actually, this is a good segue for you, Mickey, because actually you've spoken about the research that you've done to help inform the ways in which we can hopefully prevent these things. So maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I also just want to, position myself in the space as well. So the audience, you guys know the perspective I'm bringing to this. And I also additionally want to say, like, in my intro, my pronouns are they, them. I identify as queer and non-binary.
Excuse me for that.
It's cool, it's cool. So I just wanted to put that out there, too. But the way I kind of fell into criminal justice work. The short version is I grew up in Texas, queer, black, first gen, gender non-conforming, was in a hostile environment, got into queer organizing to secure the safety of myself and my peoples. And that's what led me to law school, because I figured this is a way I can get tools to be able to do this for myself and more people. And in law school, I came to find out that the criminal legal system is actually at the center of all the systems that oppress all the identities and communities I'm a part of. Queer, black, immigrant, trans, non-binary, like all of these communities and identities I hold are overrepresented and disparately impacted by arrest, mass incarceration, police violence, and so on and so forth. And that extends into housing discrimination, unemployment, and so on and so forth. The collateral consequences of being vulnerable to arrest and incarceration. So I got into criminal justice work because I saw it was like, by the grace of God, I have avoided incarceration. By the grace of God. But like, data, research, I'm an anomaly. I should have been incarcerated and repeatedly. Like there's so many things in so many places where I should have ended up incarcerated, but instead I avoided it and ended up at a place like Harvard Law School, where nothing I was getting in the classroom matched up with the reality I knew to be true. The way they talk about the law and the rule of law and this and that. And so I went to law school, I took the bar, and had no intention of practicing because I wanted to understand it, but I knew that it needed to be ultimately just, totally dismantled, right? So that's what I've been trying to figure out. And what Devon was speaking to is I got my start when I graduated law school and knew I wanted to find a way, how do we actually figure this out from a human-centered place rather than doing what we've been doing, which is law and policy and reform, and moving in all the ways that we've been told are the proper ways to ask for change. while looking for meaning in law school, I was looked outside to the community to see what's going on, like how can I get involved to try and make law school meaningful to me. And I found a startup community organization that was trying to address street and gang violence from an innovative way. So in Boston, this is true of most cities, 1% of young people, mostly black and brown boys, drive 60 to 70% of street violence. And the way the city and pretty much everybody has decided to interpret that data is that if anybody shouldn't be incarcerated, it's these boys, because they're just terrible, right? They're just clearly like, okay, we can talk about nonviolent offenders, this, that, and the third, but like these guys are just really bad guys and they deserve to be locked up. And the community organization that I joined and got the people I got linked up with were like, let's flip that on the head. Like that doesn't really make sense. Instead, like what if we looked at it like in Boston is a small city, 450 young men. If we can figure out what they need, you could address 60 to 70% of street violence in the city. So like, let's figure out what they need. And that's what I did. That's the work I did in law school. And then when I graduated, I told them, I said, I don't know what you need, but I'm here to help. So I just joined and helped build the program. And it's beautiful how it's grown. But the main thing it did for me is that it was my real legal education, because I learned what it meant to just listen to people and ask them what they need, and see when you give them what they need, things change. Like nobody wants to be in survival economies, nobody wants to be in the streets, nobody wants to be incarcerated, but the truth of the matter is like these guys who are the population of people that most of the country right now, when we talk about criminal justice reform, they're the people that they're leaving out. They're like, we're talking about everybody but these guys. I just want to paint a picture of these guys, because try not to get emotional, because I'm like, we have a whole rest of the panel to go. But these are boys. Like I have seen with my own two eyes, like these young boys, 16, 17-year-olds, like playing tag in the gym. We had a safe space for them because a lot of them couldn't leave their houses or were homeless, right? If they're in the streets, your life is under threat. If you don't have a home to go, like you see how things can spiral. But you know, like playing, and then literally 5 seconds later, an entire SWAT team of police coming in, holsters ready, because one of the boys is on probation and his bracelet died, his ankle bracelet died. And so because he's a gang member, because he grew up on a particular street, that's how they came in, right? These boys were just playing tag, and all of a sudden there's SWAT team in the gym, outside, like this. Like that's the reality of like the violent offenders. And to bring data and research into it, so fast forward, how I got into data and research is that I was doing street and gang violence work, and I saw the truth of the matter, which is nobody, even these violent offenders, nobody's violent. They're victimized, traumatized, they're hurt, they're in need, and nobody's been taking care of them since they were born, essentially. It's just a series of society and the institutions that should have been taking care of them just choosing to not and push them off to somebody else. So I saw what happens when you take care of them. They start to do better, but what I also saw is how the system continues to pull them in. Like I had guys that were doing everything right. Like they're showing up, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're going to classes, they're doing everything they can to try and get out the streets. And honestly, like police just didn't want to see them out in the streets, so they found ways to pull them in. Massachusetts legalized cannabis, and I had guys still getting arrested for cannabis just because they were on paper so they could, right? And so I wondered what it meant to change systems. Like how do you actually change this shit? Sorry, excuse my language. But anyway, I was like, all right, how do you actually make the system move? And so I went to the Vera Institute of Justice to do research in local jails and try and figure out, like, what does it actually mean to implement alternatives to incarceration? And the valuable education I got from that was, one, I understood how to speak the language of data. Like, we would go into government jurisdictions who were like, usually they wanted to address local mass incarceration because they couldn't afford it anymore. It's very expensive, and it actually makes the problems you're trying to solve worse. So they're really like, we don't know, but we know how to stop this thing. And so we would go in and look at their data, what's driving your jail admissions, what's driving your jail population numbers. But for me, the most important work was we would interview the people. This was something that my team specifically was big on, was the data that we're most interested in is the voices of the people who are incarcerated. So I spent a lot of time interviewing women in local jails. Some were there for 2 weeks, some had been there for 6 months, some were in administrative segregation or solitary confinement, which is a nice way of saying solitary confinement. And we would just ask them, it was like a lot of talking and hearing people's stories. How did you get here, right? the DAs, the police, they have their ideas on why and how their jails are filled and overflowing. And so we wanted to go in and ask the people. And I'll pause there because that's the perspective I bring. And you asked me like sort of what do I have to say about the data and research. What I have to say, and I'll sort of sum it up here, because this is what I have learned from my lived experience of being in and with and advocating on behalf of, but also what the data and the research shows is that specifically with women, and this includes non-binary and trans women, we're talking the expansive use of the word, most women are incarcerated for non-violent offenses, and it's usually tied to things like homelessness, not economic marginalization. Black and brown women tend to have negative wealth compared to their white and Latinx counterparts. Basically, it's like women have been seriously impacted by the war on drugs, but they were left out of the conversation when we talk about mass incarceration. I'll fast forward to like the punchline, because this is like women's incarceration is arguably, I would say, the most important thing we could be talking about when it comes to criminal justice right now, because women are the fastest growing correctional population in the country. Pre-1970, we barely had any women in prisons and jails. That number has increased 14-fold since 1970, so that's 40 years, 14% or 14 times increase in incarceration rates. What we know is most women do not need to be incarcerated. There's no public safety issue, so we're holding them and causing immense harm to the human spirit and whatnot. But to like really play this out, because Donna talked about how we're on a dark road. 80% of incarcerated women are primary caregivers, meaning that they are the only parent to children, 80%. And what we are just beginning to learn about the impacts of kids who have incarcerated parents, let alone their only primary care provider, is, it's tragic. Cognitive, behavioral, chronic health problems, and the biggest thing is at least 5 times more likely to be incarcerated themselves. The guys I was working with when I was doing street and gang violence are products of what happens, like the small micro data point of what we're creating an entire generation of, which is, so I'll pause there. It's the ripple effect, but we don't talk about the women, even though that's the main, like jurisdictions all over the country right now are having to build multi-million-dollar correctional facilities because they can't figure out how to stop filling their jails and prisons with women. So I'll pause there and we can get into whatever, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. That was very informative, all right? And this is the importance of the data, all right? Because we all say, and we look at like data and research, we be like, but it's really important because it frames the work, and to have a woman of color be able to speak to that is even more important. So thank you for that. You just spoke about the primary focus of the data research that you did specifically around women in correctional facilities. And I'm just thinking about here in New York City, right, we have Rikers Island, and the women's facilities is called Rosie's. And from what I know, from what I last heard, I think now it's maybe less than 200 women in Rosie's. It probably more correction officers working in Rosie's than women that are detained.
2-to-1 ratio.
All right, and we have a special guest today who speak to the issues of solitary confinement, but we'll get to that later. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, because unfortunately Mary had to have that unpleasant experience of ag-sag, and I don't think no one actually understands the difference between being ag-sagged and being in solitary confinement. I'm not quite sure that our audience knows that, so maybe you can frame that for us, Mary.
Sure. Yeah, so basically ASAG is administrative segregation. So you can be sent to administrative segregation for being assaulted, for being raped, or having, in my case, having a major surgery. I had a C-section during the labor process where they felt that I needed to be in isolation. So essentially, it's another version of solitary confinement, but for your own protection. So you go, in my case, going from one traumatic experience to the next. And I had stayed in, I believe, ASAG for about 8 days. And it was pure torture. You know, from one moment giving birth, should be a celebratory thing, to being stripped away from my newborn and then placed in isolation for 8 days was truly just horrific.
Ooh, God bless you for your resilience. I see you, Donna. We actually Mickey just spoke to the violent and non-violent issue that we're dealing with. And I love how, Donna, because I've heard you speak to the importance of recognizing people as being people. And maybe you could give some context to the difference in the ways in which not only media perceives it, but just even us in the community perceive that, right? Because these are mostly black and brown people who are going into these facilities, and they are stigmatized as a result of these labels. So maybe you could break that down for our community.
Well, I want to go back to what Mickey said. First of all, they know how to solve it. They just want to continue building prisons and jails because it's making money. And it's just continuing that slavery mentality, that slavery behavior, because that's exactly how they see us. Like, that's how we're perceived. And so they know how to solve it. That's why we're here. We're solving it. I'll just leave it like that. But, to what Mary was saying, I spent 2.5 years total. My first experience walking into Rikers Island, I was placed in protective custody. That's another name for solitary confinement. It's all the same thing. It's just coded, it's just worded differently so you could receive it differently, but it's the same thing, it's solitary confinement. And I was an adolescent. And so the trauma of that, I will never ever forget that. But that so-called dichotomy of violent and nonviolent, I'm considered a violent criminal because of what I was convicted of. I've never hurt anyone in my life, not intentionally. I've never killed anyone in my life, right? So let's just be honest about how we label people, how media plays a big part into how people and people of color are labeled. When you see stuff in the media, when you hear stories about a brown person that was harmed, the first things that you hear was this person was a monster, right? This person was a gang person, this person, all these denigrating and dehumanizing labels that have placed on our people. So you won't see us as human beings, you will see us as other than. And so this is the same thing that happens to women. I, in the paper, in the media, was the leader of a girl gang. I don't know what gang, and I don't know what I was leading. I was the youngest one and the most victimized, besides the person that, whose life was lost, Mr. V. So all these narratives that are created are not our truths, right? And so automatically you would see somebody, and because you've heard something, or because the color of our skin, or because the neighborhoods we come from, or however we choose to look, or who we choose to love, automatically we're different, we're bad, we're monsters, and we're not worthy. And so when you hear these conversations about violent and nonviolent, a lot of the people in prison, especially women, to your point, Mickey, especially women, are not violent. There are certain crimes that are considered to be violent crimes and no one's hurt. Robberies of violent crime. You don't really have to do anything violent, right? You take somebody, not saying it's a good thing, but if I took your phone, and depending on the amount that you paid for your phone, what the phone is worth, the charges are leveled up. And so how I took it, if I snatched it from you, that's violent. Is that really violent? How many times have you snatched a piece of paper or something from someone or from somewhere, right? And so we have to look at it. We have to really look at it contextually, like what are they saying? What's really going on here? And again, to Mickey's point, the vast majority of women are not just in there, because of maybe, substance use or mental health, because that's the driving factor for black women, mental health and substance use. They're in prison because of poverty. Poverty in itself is a crime, and it's violent. We perpetuate poverty so much, and it's violent. But who's driving that? Who's driving that? Our communities are riddled with so many things, but who's driving that? When you go back and we talk about the war on drugs, what war? Who's the war on? And where'd the drugs come from? Where did the drugs come from? And we know now, we heard the stories, they're telling it, right? But we still continue to still drive that narrative. The people that are on public assistance was created because it's necessary, right? What's his name? Roosevelt. He did that because it was necessary. But when you talk about black people being on public assistance, it's a problem. That in itself is a driving factor for mass incarceration. So all these things are used, these tools that are giving to everyone to use for betterment are used in a negative way to harm black and brown communities and people. You don't see our children as children. Our children are seen as adults and monsters. When one of our children acts out in school, they're not acting out, there's some stuff going on. But instead of looking at what's going on, did that child eat? Did that child get some sleep? Is that child being abused at home? Automatically, you call the police into the school, and the police either kill our children or harm our children. So when we talk about violent and nonviolent, we have to really look at ourselves and really understand how we contribute to that narrative. Instead of getting to know the person and understand the person, the root cause, or maybe where the person comes from, what's going on in that person's life, or what has happened to that person. We want to label, we create a narrative, and then we want to lock them up and throw away the key. A lot of people that I've met in prison, women obviously, they weren't even the driving person, the main person in the, whatever the crime might have been. A lot of them were victims. A lot of women become victimized because a lot of the women, and you know the research shows this, a lot of the women in our prisons and jails have been so severely traumatized that nobody gave a damn. Nobody wanted to do anything to help them. And that's why we have to call it out. There's so much trauma that is so layered, decade upon decade upon decade upon decade, centuries. This country was built on trauma. Everything that we look at, this building, 1866, the year this building was built. Who built it? And what trauma surrounds it? The land that we stand on. Whose land was it really? And is it really? That we take advantage of, and we don't even understand what our indigenous brothers and sisters had to live through. But they're the most targeted population in our system as well. I mean, we don't talk about that. Every single moment, an indigenous woman or man is being harmed, murdered, or incarcerated, disappeared, and we don't even talk about that.
Whew. Thank you for that. And just for the record, I am a violent felon. All right, so just to put that out there, so that nice intro that Anissa said, you see the accolades and all that stuff, I'm a violent felon. So how do you interact with that? All right, so it goes to show that, you know, people are flawed, people make bad choices, but we are still people, and we can still do great things, right, if we're only given the opportunity. So I'm gonna ask you this, Mickey, because this is something that really sits with me and bothers me. First, let me acknowledge the brothers and sisters, family members, all the loved ones who've been impacted by the Attica riots, which was literally 50 years ago, right, this month. I'm just thinking about how in prison in particular, the ways in which ag-seg plays out. And for someone I'm an advocate for the access to education inside of prisons, particularly higher ed. And something that does not sit well with me is the ways in which particularly people from the LGBT community are placed in ag-seg, which prohibits them from having access to the programs in jails and prisons. Have you been working, I guess this is a me question, have you been working on anything to thwart that?
So in my advocacy work, I don't do correctional advocacy work, but what I can speak in terms of when I say a lot of my advocacy work is about trying to close the front end to incarceration, right? So how do we address arrest rates, jail incarceration rates, et cetera. But you're talking about conditions work, right? So there's people who work on specifically improving the conditions of confinement. That's not my bag of tea because I want to just get rid of the correctional facilities, but we do need people to do that work. What I'll say, I'll speak to what I can say about the incarceration experiences as it relates to and intersects with the queer experience or the trans, like, non-normative gender experience. I mean, when I was doing research in women's jail, an interesting fact about women's incarceration is that a disproportionate amount of women who are incarcerated are actually trans, non-binary, or queer. And what's really alarming is if you look at girls' incarceration, almost 50% are queer or gender non-conforming or trans. And if you look at why that might be, it's because trans, queer, and gender non-conforming youth of color are disproportionately homeless and also lacking support systems because a lot of them don't have a home and are more likely to be engaged in survival economies or street economies because they have to find ways to take care of themselves. All of this makes queer and trans youth of color and people of color generally, but specifically women of color, susceptible to arrest and incarceration. So when I was doing women's incarceration work, just inherently when you're focusing on women's incarceration, you're also talking about queer and trans people's incarceration, though we don't talk about it that way. And I'll just say that a lot of them end up in ADSEG by nature of, for a number of reasons. One, the most, I don't know how much I can cuss on this panel, but apparently I don't think I'm gonna get in trouble. But the most fucked reason is like the for your own protection piece, right? Because it's like, oh, because you're likely to gonna experience violence over here, so we're gonna subject you to certain violence over here. And they're not protecting them from anybody, and that's what goes on within jails and prisons as it relates to guards and COs. I won't speak at length because I can't for confidentiality reasons, but when I was doing research, you can't. So Donna will talk to it, but like when I must have interviewed, which was insane in and of itself, but I spent like a couple of weeks inside a women's jail from we'd get there 7 in the morning, leave at like 7 p.m. There was a blizzard, lockdown. We went through all that stuff. And I talked to maybe, 100 women over the course of 2 weeks in groups as individuals, and just listened. And the amount of, anyway, ADSEG's not protecting anybody. And guards, COs, the correctional facility is the most violent thing you can do to a person, one. The second thing is a number of the women I spoke to who also happen to be queer or gender non-conforming or trans in identity, you see women tend to get in trouble more often. Like they get punished when they're incarcerated, they actually get in trouble more often. They get written up for more, meaning they get sent to ADSEG more than men. And what's interesting is people don't really, again, we're not talking about women, so we don't get curious about the data about women. But if you really, there's the little bit of research that has been done makes a point that this is my scholarship and my academic curiosities are in exploring this piece. There's a gender analysis to be done. Women get in trouble when they're incarcerated more often because guards get upset more when women talk back or don't follow the rules or whatever. There's a lot. We have to look at the gender piece of this. And when you talk about gender disruptive women, meaning queer or masculine presenting, that makes you you're even more disruptive of the status quo and the gender norms that prisons and correctional facilities specifically are really designed to reinforce. So you see how it's like, my whole thing is like, my sort of shtick outside of this talk is, queer justice is abolition work, right? Trans justice is abolition work. When we talk about women's justice, when we talk about gender justice, mass incarceration, all of these things are of the same stuff. And the reason we talk about it in these silos are because we've been encouraged to do so, because it's a lot easier to manage us when we're not working together than when we recognize that all of these fights are actually against the same thing. So how do we coordinate and collaborate? So anyway, I'll pause there, but it's like, yeah, it's all the same shit. Like, if you're not talking about queer people, trans people, women, youth, if you're immigrants, if you're not talking about these intersectional experiences when we're talking about how are we solving for mass incarceration, we're just setting ourselves up for more hurt in the future, so.
You just got me thinking about a few things. Actually, me and Mickey, we gonna do some stuff offline and continue doing this work. But for the purposes of time, I know that, well, rather for the purposes of time, I want to invite the audience in because I know there's so many things that we've briefly touched on and y'all may want to know more about. And here's an opportunity for y'all to do so because, you know, it's really important for people who have a lived experience to speak to the issues at hand. So do not be shy. Do not feel as there's any question that is deemed to be silly. And you can come up to the podium and, you know, we can engage as a community.
Hello, I just want to thank all of you for being here and for this talk and Pioneer Works for creating this space. I'm a child psychologist and I spent some time working in reunification for incarcerated women and their children coming out of the foster care system. I did this work outside of New York, so I'm just kind of curious, Donna, what your experience was like. What kind of supports were you given or not given in connecting with your family after being incarcerated? Thank you.
Hold on, what's your name, sister?
Nakami.
Nakami.
Thank you for that. So I wasn't really given any support. We created the supports that I was able to get, we created when I was in Bedford Hills. A lot of the stuff that we see happening now, even college, right, prison education, a lot of the programs, HIV and AIDS, domestic violence, we did that in Bedford Hills. So we created those kind of spaces for us because we didn't have it, and then we had some outside help, obviously. But, you know, every case is unique, right? We have our own unique issues. And so my issue with my daughter, I didn't get to see her. I think I can count on one hand out of the 27 years how many times I saw her for a chunk of that. So, and I don't want to go into it because she's here and I see her face and it still affects us, and that's the thing, right? We're talking about the residual effects and the consequences of what happens when we tear families apart and we take mothers away from their children, no matter the reasons or the circumstances. And so it's a difficult thing. And that's why, you know, I do my best to emphasize the need to stop doing that, the need to maintain relationships and bonds with mother and child, you know, parent and child, because it's so important. Because to what Mickey said, oftentimes we find that our children are then incarcerated or are placed in whatever system, right? Foster care is a system, right, that doesn't do anyone really well, doesn't serve our children well. Some people, some women that I know have lost their child to children to foster care and can't find them now, right? They were just taken from them. And that's why we helped write that legislation as well to, you know, and I forgot the whole name of it, but to stop taking a child away or the children away from a parent so quickly, you know, and allow the parent to be in that child's life because it's difficult. And so, unfortunately, you know, I didn't have too much of that support, but I did get some of it. But a lot of it we have to do on our own. A lot of it we have to do on our own. So we have to do better. We have to create, and we don't have to reinvent wheels, right? The wheel's already made. The wheel was already invented. All we have to do is fortify that wheel and invest in it. And that's what we need to do, invest in the programs that exist, invest in the people that are doing the work, and invest in the communities from where people are coming from, right, who are filling up the system, so that way we don't continue this cycle. Because we didn't do all this on our own, right? This was designed, again, deliberately designed to do what it's doing. And so we have to undo it.
Thank you, Donna. Anybody else brave enough to come share what's on their mind? Because I know it's been a lot that's been said.
Hi, my name is Marwa. My pronouns are she, her. This question is for Mary, but also all of the panelists. I was just wondering about the role of, you know, art in personal healing. You opened with that song, and, you know, I recognize that in order for us to, like, be able to heal and dismantle systems, we need to be able to come back to a place of dignity in our own body, in our own soul. And so what has the role of art played in that transformation? Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, the art, it saved me. When I was released, I really didn't get a chance to process, even during my incarceration, and then after being released, I really didn't get a chance to understand and process the trauma that I had experienced while in prison. And it wasn't until I embarked on a journey of creating this film that I had a chance to, for one, as a performance artist, like, you know, recreate those scenes and be in that space and have that cathartic, therapeutic release. And it was through that I was able to connect my story to, you know, thousands of other women, and then to this national movement that Donna and, you know, there's a whole tribe of women advocating for reproductive justice, you know, for family reunification and things like that. And I think through that, you know, I was able to find purpose and really heal. So now as a teaching artist, I've been able to go back to the same facility where, you know, I spent some of my time of incarceration and teach some of those tools to the women there, where that, you know, they can take ownership over their own stories and examine and, you know, really work through that and reimagine their narrative in a more authentic and empowering way so that it's sustainable upon release.
Can I speak to that just also shortly? Just a totally different sort of way to respond to the question, but I think in addition to the healing aspect that Mary's talking about in terms of why we need art and we need to, like, why we need to focus on things like, you know, when we talk about criminal justice and stuff, we talk about like the policy and the law and the this and the data and this and that, and like those are all important. But what is often not talked about and what is the most important is the human toll, right? Like the toll on individual humans, the spirit, the psyche, and how that affects the collective humans, right? The communities. And that's like talking about things like love and compassion and healing and self-expression and like self-determination, like the ability to be able to freely express yourself. And I want to also talk about like how art and creativity, I think, play a pivotal and critical role in imagining what the future looks like, right? Like in doing this work from the law, policy, research perspective, what I see as a major hindrance is lack of imagination among those, not just those with power, but those who have been most impacted too. Like, and I get it, it's hard, like there's a lot of days where it's just like, yo, this shit is just, it's too hard, like I'm over it, like I'm done. But the reason we need art and other creative spaces and efforts as part of the advocacy effort is because that's what nourishes the human soul and gives us like, we're fighting for freedom to live and be joyous, but what's the point if while we're fighting, we're not also like taking advantage of what joy is available to us or creating more opportunities for joy by those who are most impacted. And so, I don't know, it's not a real answer, but it's just like, I was super excited to speak on this panel because I've spent a lot of my time speaking with, you know, other academics or like stakeholders or honestly the people who have been talking about this stuff and the people who have been trying to work on this stuff. And I'm not saying that we don't need those people to come along, but I see places like arts and like the creative spaces and creatives as a community and as a people, and each of us have creative like energy within us to express. But it's like, I think that's where the solutions are gonna come from. It's like, it's not gonna come from reading more books. It's gonna come from like talking to more people and being like, I don't know, what's your human element to contribute to this? And I think art has a unique way of being able to facilitate that, because art and play are where the real stuff comes out, and that's the only way we're going to be able to figure out how to get out of this mess. So,
see, these panelists is great. I didn't even have to bring that out because I was going to prompt that up, and then it just came out. But quickly, in my mind, I always tell people, well, not in my mind, but I always tell people, and Mary and Donna specifically could speak to this, any person who have experienced incarceration is an artist in some shape, form, or fashion, because you imagine the ways in which you're going to get out of there, what you're going to do. You visualizing a lot of stuff. So if you really want to think about it, any person who has experienced incarceration by default is an artist, you know? So is anybody else willing to engage with the team up here?
I'm curious about why you keep doing this work. What is like the vision that you are working towards, and what gives you the energy to keep going when things feel really, really, really tough?
I think we could go down the line with that one, because that is a good question. Why do we do the work?
Well, for me, it's ensuring that no other woman that's pregnant goes through what, I had to endure. And that I use my voice as much as possible for the women that can't utilize their own. So that's what keeps me going.
I do this work because I'm tired of people being disappeared. I'm an abolitionist at heart, but I'm a realist. And I know abolition is not going to come overnight. Harriet Tubman said she could have freed more people if only they knew they were enslaved, right? So if I can chip at it one section at a time, one whatever at a time, I feel like that will bring some healing, because we need to heal. We really need to heal. We're too wounded, we're too broken, we're too hurt, and we need to heal. And so I'm not going to stop until I feel, I guess until I'm done. And I don't know what done looks like, right? But people's lives are at stake.
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I ask myself it often because it gets tiring. And I guess one thing I'll speak to is that, and I want to say it's because like the advocacy has been sort of professionalized, and that like people build careers to go and do advocacy, and it's like I think that's one thing, and it does some good stuff. But like for me, like there's not really an opt out. Like I would love, honestly, I think there's some days I would love to be able to not do this work, but I still step outside, and I'm still queer, and I'm still black, and it's still all these things. Like, and so on the one hand, what keeps me doing this work is that it's necessary. I can't have peace right now, so I would like to contribute to my own peace and the peace of those who I love and am in community with. But I would say, like, ultimately what really drives me to do this work is that I really believe in people. Like, I love people. I'm an introvert, but I love people. And I've had the benefit and privilege of loving a lot of different kinds of people and being a part of a lot of different kinds of communities. And I think the most amazing thing about our humans are our capacity to change, for change, right? Like, you've seen it. Somebody can be one person their whole life, and then one thing can happen and they can change, right? You've seen it, you see it. And so that keeps me going, because like humans are amazing, and I think that we can build a much more beautiful world than what we're in. And also knowing the history and the data and stuff, like I really see how it's like people a long time ago built this machine in the system to do exactly what it's doing. But there's also a good bunch of people with power that are like, I was just talking to my partner about this the other day, it's like they're like, this machine is out of control and we don't know how to stop it. And I've seen that, like, where it's like, it's really, it's just the people that are dictating how we do things are not the people with the knowledge with how to fix it or change it. So, yeah, but there's possibility, like, there are solutions. We know how to fix it. And so that keeps me going, because we know how to fix it, so.
I guess I'll give my quick sentiment. The reason I do this work, because I know that there are at least 2.6 million people still incarcerated, and I know what that looks like after serving all that time, and my goal ultimately is to change the narrative of what that actually looks like upon people's release from jails and prisons. And I'm also recognizing that part of the reason why I do this work definitely ain't the money, but more so because it's therapeutic in a way. It's actually a piece of our healing, right? Because we know what it looks like, and I guess that's what continues to drive me. And if I could contribute to the change in a little way, then so be it. So with that, let's give our esteemed panelists a round of applause. Thank you for sharing your narratives, blessing us with your presence, and I know that y'all gonna continue to do the work. So with that, we're about to segue to our special guest. We actually have some urgent news happening here. Without further ado, Mr. Jerome Wright from Holt Solitary Confinement. He has some things in which to speak to us about. Is actually very urgent, which is why he was asked to come today to speak to the community about the need, our need to contribute to the change that needs to happen. So without further ado, I'm gonna let you speak to the people.
Thank you, thank you. I first want to say thank you to Pioneer Works. This has been an amazing series. It has been a blessing for me and the Halt Solitary Campaign to be a part of it. I think Donna said it, that if people don't know, like Harriet said, there's a lot of people she could have freed if they knew they were enslaved. When people don't know, you can't really charge them with the responsibility of doing anything. So when Pioneer Works puts on a series like this and you get participation like this and it's viewed, you know, online, and people get educated and then they can weigh in and help. It's really hard following that panel. I wish I had two other people up here with me to hold me down like they did. I mean, that was like, I mean, you want to know criminal justice 101, you just got a tutorial in that, everything they spoke about. So let me tell you quickly who I am, because I was so excited about what they did, and having to follow that with such bad news, I would love to continue that discussion. We know women don't get enough credit, enough emphasis in this patriarchal society we live in. And so I would love to continue that. But today I'm here to tell you about deaths. People are dying. So my name is Jerome Wright. I am one of the statewide organizers for the Halt Solitary Campaign, and we have been advocating over 10, 12 years to end long-term solitary confinement, which we know is torture. I am a survivor of solitary, like Mary, like Donna, and I think they eloquently told you, being a survivor is loosely saying that, because we did not come out of that unscathed, and some of us, like myself, remain in battle with some of the trauma and torture that was visited upon us. Solitary confinement is torture. I know people think of torture and they think you got to be waterboarded and your fingernails pulled out. But let me submit to you that most of you have lived through this pandemic. And that little bit of time that you had to spend in your own humble abode with all the creature comforts you've paid money for, saved up for, the DVD, the 90-inch screen, you had it all. And half of you at least was going crazy, and you had all the things of home. So can you imagine exponentially how that must feel to men and women who are in a 6x9 cell that have none of those comforts, who have nothing but the four walls and the sound of people dying and going crazy around them for entertainment? So this is really serious, but what's going on right now impacts each and every one of you, whether you know it or not. Now, I know we had a psychologist come up here, and I'm sure we got some other professionals in here, but none of us are immune to getting arrested, right? And right now on Rikers Island, we have a crisis of death and destruction. Rikers Island right now has experienced 10 deaths in the last 9 months. So that's one person a month on average dying there, many by suicide in solitary confinement. What we have to do now is become a community that cares more about doing something than about talking about it. And that's why I'm coming to you today, because I know people at Pioneer Works and your affiliates are about doing things. And you know, I get a lot of talkers around me, but we need doers now. And before this is over, people are going to explain to you what you can do to help. But let me tell you, they talked about ADSEG and PC and all these different variations of solitary, right? All torture. There is indisputable evidence, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, indisputable, from every vista of science, medicine, psychology, that solitary confinement does nothing but destroy the human spirit. Ultimately, people take their life. There's nobody disputes that. So how on God's green earth can you tell me that we should be using that to protect somebody? We know, you know, everybody knows that it destroys people. So by me saying I'm putting you there for your own protection, knowing that when I put you there it's going to destroy you, it's not for your protection. Never has been. It is the whipping board of the Department of Corrections. What it is for is to break you down and make you submit to them in ways that you would not believe that you will do when you're tortured like that. That's the hope. And we have got to stop that. And we just won a bill to end that, right? Yeah, oh, clap. Yeah, right. 2 bills. But let me say you this. You're clapping, but right now, the Bureau of Corrections on Rikers Island is attempting to construct a cell just like that and add a 3-foot abutment to it and call that out-of-cell time. So let me get it to you. So this is my cell right here. They add this little piece here, another cage, and when I get out of my bed and I go into this, I am out of my cell, no longer in solitary confinement. That's what they're trying to sell to the public. If they get that off, every gain we've made in eviscerating solitary confinement is lost, because now they will construct these at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars per cell in order to house people, to protect them, in some cases they say, but ultimately to destroy us.
Take a breather.
I want them to sit with that for a minute, because I know what that's going to do. It's been done to me. There, but for the grace of God, go you. And I'm telling you, there's nobody sitting in here who's immune to coming out of a club and getting in a car after having a drink, not being drunk, and being pulled over and said, well, we think you blew the breathalyzer, and take you to Rikers Island, where one of the members of the Board of Corrections say that anybody placed on Rikers Island right now is in fear of their life and safety. Now, this is a chairman of the board saying that we shouldn't be placing people in there because we cannot secure them. We got correction officers signing out en masse, not coming to work. We have whole units where incarcerated people are left to fend for themselves for food, protection, everything. There's no supervision. We have people sleeping in showers in their own feces. We got women in cells, no sanitary napkins, no medical attention, nothing. If we were doing this to soccer moms and hockey dads, there would be an outcry in this city so loud that we would hear it resonating still right now. But because it's predominantly black, brown, Latinx, and poor people, we don't hear a word. The system is not broken. It is working the exact way they set it up to work. It is our responsibility to break it. And the only way you break it is when you have to be involved and grab a sledgehammer like the rest of us and put your work in. Donna, Mary, myself, we're doing our part. But we've come to that fork in the road where us doing it alone is not going to suffice anymore. And it's not about keeping somebody out of a cell. It's now about keeping people alive. Alive. There's no death penalty in the state of New York, but you can send somebody to a jail, not even prison, a jail, which means you haven't been convicted of anything, and die or be assaulted. And let me tell you something. They weren't going to be explicit, but I can tell you, I work on a PREA council, and there are more assaults sexually by staff on incarcerated people, men and women, than there will ever be by incarcerated people on each other. Out of 635 incidents reported last year, 35 were incarcerated person on incarcerated person. The other 500 plus was staff. So while you sitting here thinking your tax dollars is going to making the community safer, what they're going to is people being destroyed to the fact that they'll come out and be worse than they went in. And what happens is this is the game they play on our community. You send them in traumatized already. Prison is more trauma. Solitary is torture. And then you bring them back out, and when they do something that's wrong, you say that's the problem, not the system that created them. What's the beauty about what I heard today is that there are crime-generative factors. Poverty, racism, sexism, you know them, but we never talk about them. We talk about people as being criminals, but we don't talk about the system that criminalizes people. Immigrants are criminalized. If you don't speak English, you're criminalized. LGBTQI, whatever, you're criminalized. Mental health issue, you're criminalized. We criminalize more people in this country than anywhere in the free world. Yet we are the land of the free. Not the free. We are the land of the incarcerated. And we need you now in this crisis moment to step up, because the city council can effectively block what's going on. If they don't and it gets over, game over for many of your loved ones and maybe even yourself if you unfortunately find yourself arrested and placed in custody. I don't know what else to say. I mean, how do you feel about that? As a tax-paying citizen, as a citizen in a country that's supposed to be what they say it's supposed to be, how do you feel about that? Are you incensed enough that you will do something, or are you going to be, I don't know the quote, I don't know who it's by, but I like it. It says something about that you never remember the noise of your enemies, but you do remember the silence of your friends. And right now, too many of our friends are silent, and we need you to make some noise to free the people, to end this paradigm of punishment, torture, and trauma that's continually be visited upon us, and then expect people to comport themselves differently with no resources. Let me tell you something. This is just a footnote. I don't know how many stimulus checks you got. I only got one. But they were giving them out like, so you telling me that any time this country could have abated any economic crisis it wanted to by helping the people out. Anytime they could have done that, yet they let us suffer and commit crimes and then penalize us for that so they can set up an alternate economy for themselves. Yeah, that's me. A few pounds on. I don't know what to say. We really need your support right now. And not just you sitting here, because every person sitting here has a sphere of influence that you belong to. Friends, family, co-workers, associates, even some of your haters, you still talk to them, so you might as well give them the news about this so that they can do something other than hating on you. Let them hate on this system that is harming us. Injustice harms and hurts, so justice is supposed to heal. And the only way we heal is by stepping up and changing this system. We need you. I don't like saying that to people because usually they disappoint you. I need you, man. They got an excuse. I'm telling you that now, and I'm willing to get the disappointment, because if one person said, I'm with you, we're going to do something, and that's one more than we had before. So we need you. We want you. And I'm asking you, who is going to help? Donna, you already helping. No, and see, one person put their hand up. Now, some of you, okay, he did his hand up, then he put his head, you know what he was doing. And I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but I want to say, what you should be, if you was a sports fan and we say, well, who's your team? People jump up ready to fight and argue. I'm a Giants fan, I'm a Jets fan, Yankees fan. But when we talk about saving lives, our own people, crickets. That's what they want from us. We should be as fired up about ending solitary, breaking this paradigm of punishment as we are about the Jets and the Giants, the Yankees and the Mets, the Rangers and the Islanders, and God knows who else you favor. That's our problem. Our priorities are messed up. We get excited for the wrong things. We get involved for the wrong reasons. This is something you should be excited about, doing something to change. Please join us. I'm not too proud to beg. You know why? Because I begged for less things before. And this is big to me. I got family and friends right now who are sitting on Rikers Island and they're screaming for help. And I got to be the one to ask you to help me help them. And that's what this is about today. And that's why I am interrupting this lovely panel discussion on women's issues that long overdue and need to be discussed. But if women are dying, the people that died on Rikers Island, they were women that died too. It's not just men. So we got to save our people. We got to be responsible. We can't depend on anybody else to do it. And I know they're going to give you the information to how to do it. And I'm asking you to please make this commitment today. Say, before the night is over, I'm going to do this and I'm going to share this information with at least one friend and one family member. That's all I'm asking. At least one friend and one family member. And you say, I got all these friends. Right, they're going to get it because if you tell it to the right one friend, they mouth going to tell everybody, right? One friend, one family member as a commitment. The rest, if you do more and all that, I love you. But one friend, one family member as a commitment that I'm going to do this today, not tomorrow, because every time I say I'm going to do something tomorrow, it don't get done. So that's just me. So I'm going to use putting you in my shoes right now, not tomorrow, today. Now, can I get a show of hands of who's going to do that today? Almost unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Before you go, give them the information. Give them the information to the site. Even though for Freedoms and Pioneer Works, is going to be posted. Give them the information on the site and where they can go to learn more.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you. That's right. This is why he's a great moderator, because I was about to step off without doing all that. If you go to the Halt Solitary Campaign website, you can be updated on everything I just told you, because the Halt Solitary Campaign, along with the Jails Action Coalition, have been in collaboration in fighting this onslaught of crisis that's going on right now. So if you go to Halt Solitary, the website, put in Halt Solitary, it'll come up. If you put Jails Action Coalition, all of the information I just told you will come up. But we have a specific thing that we're going to give you so that you can do something active tonight with your one friend that you're going to share with and your one family member. And that is reaching out to the City Council Chairman Corey Johnson and imploring him to do what he knows is right, and that's to not let the Board of Corrections certify this new solitary confinement cell by another name, and to sign on to a petition and a sign-on letter saying you do not agree with this and that this is antithetical to any of the gains that we have made in criminal justice reform over the past year. It is going backwards and not forward. Any questions? I mean, you could come up to the mic and say something to me too. I mean,
Could you spell the website?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. HALT is it's an acronym. It's HALT, and solitary is all one name. HALT Solitary. If you do hashtag HALT Solitary, Everything will come up. And the HALT stands for Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement. And that's what we just got passed, that they're trying to usurp that. They're trying to get around allowing that to go in effect, which by March of 22 has to be implemented in the system.
And I want to let people know that the links for these campaigns that Jerome has mentioned are currently on the For Freedoms Instagram account. So if you go to the For Freedoms story, you can find the link on a sticker on the page.
And lastly, I wanted to answer that question about why we do this work. I know people think that because, we've been in there that we have some type of maybe vendetta or reason to do it that's not as savory as most people might like to think. I'm going to tell you personally why I do it. If I don't, who is? Because everybody and anybody can do it. But what I found out is when everybody and anybody can do something, usually nobody does. So I'm going to be somebody that does something. And it's a way of me giving back. I can be honest, I committed my crime, and I was a detriment to my community. And the way to reverse that is to become an asset and no longer a liability. And the one way you become an asset is by changing things so that other people have opportunity not to make the mistakes that you made. And that's why I do what I do. And will do it until I die.
No doubt. Thank you for that, brother.
Thank you. And thank
we appreciate you.
Thank you.